form bonds with the teacher. Now, once you let every student work at their own pace and it's not a lecture model anymore, it completely liberates what you can do. We really are at one of those crazy times in I think, civilization, where we're at this inflection point. Information, the cost of delivering it is getting close to zero, or pretty much zero. The world is getting more connected. And if, any kind of survey of history, you see at inflection points in history that new institutions emerge. And we're hoping, and once again, it would seem delusional.
Is this a good level? Hello. Yes, it is. Hello. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Kim Fields from KTVB. It's an honor to be here with you all today. I know I'm a mother of two young boys, a 2-year-old Matthew and 6-month-old Sam. And education is quickly becoming the conversation at my dinner table. Right now we're talking preschool. My husband says, honey, we've got to get on this. What kind of program do we want? How long do we want Matthew there? In fact, just today, I dropped little Matthew off at his first Mother's Day Out program. So it was a little emotional morning for me. It's his first, I hear some of the mothers laughing. It's his first real socialization in an educational setting. And it was a little difficult for me to leave him. I had a few tears on the way to work, and I was thinking, gosh, is this the way it's going to be when I drop Matthew off at college? And as a mom, my mind starts racing, and I think that's going to be here before we know it. And I think just how he's going to change from the little boy he is to that first day of college, and what a significant role Idaho educators and the education system will play in the type of young man that he becomes. We really entrust our educators with so much, don't we? And I know that's why you all are here today, is for your own reasons. You have a stake in the Idaho education system. So let's get started, shall we? The Ed Sessions 2.0 Lunchtime Speaker Series is a monthly education forum featuring nationally recognized speakers from across the nation who are insiders and outsiders that have something important to say about education in America. The Ed Sessions 2.0 is the evolution of the popular and powerful Ed Sessions series hosted at the Egyptian Theater and features speakers Sir Ken Robinson, Mike Rowe, and Sal Khan. The purpose of the Ed Sessions is to elevate the conversation about what is possible in education in Idaho, to learn from national experts about what is working in education and what's not working, and to help us understand the best way to make improvements in our schools. Ed Sessions 2.0 is brought to you by the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation in partnership with KTVB, Idaho Technology Council, Idaho State Board of Education, Idaho Association of School Administrators, Idaho School Boards Association, and the Idaho Business for Education. Each month, Ed Sessions will feature a different educated-related nonprofit who contributes to the Albertsons Foundation's vision of limitless learning for all Idahoans. And this month, we are highlighting the Opportunity Scholarship from the state of Idaho. Marilyn Whitney, Communications Officer for the Office of the State Board of Education, will introduce this month's nonprofit representative. Marilyn.
Thank you, Kim. On behalf of the State Board of Education, I want to thank the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation for their partnership with the State Board on so many initiatives and efforts to support and improve education in Idaho. In fact, representatives from the foundation served on a committee that met this past summer and fall to review all of the state-funded scholarships and to discuss how the programs might be streamlined and revised to provide even greater benefit to Idaho students. The board is very grateful to the foundation for selecting one of those programs, the Idaho Opportunity Scholarship, as the beneficiary of today's event. The Scholarship Review Committee's recommendations on how to improve the programs were actually the basis for legislation the board will introduce this session to direct even more scholarship dollars to that program. Since 2008, this program has helped hundreds of Idaho students pursue their goal of obtaining a college degree or certificate. And I think the best way to really convey the impact of this program is to share what it meant to some of the recipients. Jenny Jarvis was born and raised in Boise as an only child of a single parent. She says, "I never dreamed college would be possible. I was an average high school student, and after graduation I went to work and I put my college dreams behind me. When I became a mother, I decided it was time to start college. My first year was tough, but I made it a goal to not only be successful, but to graduate with honors. After graduation, I plan to teach in the Boise area and be an active member of my community. Words cannot express how much the Opportunity Scholarship has helped me in my goal to become an educator. Without the generosity of this scholarship, it would have been next to impossible for me to be a full-time student and mother and be successful at both." You'll be happy to know that Jenny Jarvis is currently a 5th grade teacher at Mountain View Elementary School in Boise. Myrna Hurtado was another recent recipient of the Opportunity Scholarship. When she received a renewal for her second year at the University of Idaho, Myrna responded, "Thank you for rewarding me with the Opportunity Scholarship. I am super excited. You have no idea how inspired I feel right now to give it all I've got towards my education. Events like this make me feel that I can accomplish anything I set my mind to. Thank you so much." These stories are just a sample from among the many recipients who've been able to achieve their dreams and their educational goals with the help of a state scholarship. The State Board thanks the Governor for his vision in establishing the Opportunity Scholarship and the Legislature for your continuing support of the state scholarship programs. And again, thank you to the Albertsons Foundation for their partnership and all that they do for Idaho students. Thanks.
Thank you, Marilyn. Well, as you can see, this venue can only accommodate a limited number of people, and this is on purpose. We want this venue to be small enough for people to interact with each other and the speakers, but we do want the message that these speakers bring to Idaho to resound to the farthest reaches of this state, so we are webcasting this. So welcome to those of you who are viewing this via the internet. Webcast viewers, by the way, can post questions on the Ed Sessions Facebook page. Education reform, school redesign, school improvement, system reform, whatever you want to call it, it is a controversial topic no matter where you stand. All of the Ed Session speakers are nationally known and respected, but you may or may not support their position on a specific topic. The Ed Sessions believes challenging the current thinking is good for Idaho students. And because this is about our kids, we know that this can be an emotional subject. And although we promise hot topics over a hot lunch, we don't want hot tempers. That's what they tell me to tell you all, okay? No hot tempers. We do want civil discussions that are rooted in respect for one another and our guest speakers. We all going to behave? Yes, we'll all behave. Okay. All right, more ground rules that I need to lay down for you. Respect is expected and personal attacks are not. We can agree to disagree. If you have a question to ask, please write it down on the cards that are provided for you at your tables and hand it to someone with a blue name tag. Blossom and I believe Jennifer are going to be kind of roaming around to take those questions. And before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to call your attention, I just did this, to the note cards at the table. Again, if you have a question, write it down, kind of maybe wave it in the air, and Jennifer and Blossom will pick those up for you. All right, let me introduce today's speakers for you. Dr. Paul Hill is a research professor at the University of Washington. He is the founder and former director of the Center on Reinventing Public Education, which studies alternative governance and finance systems for public K-12 education. He is a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings and Hoover institutions, and he chaired Brookings National Working Commission on Choice in K-12 education. Before joining the University of Washington faculty, Hill worked for 17 years as a senior social scientist in Rand's Washington office. And something his bio didn't tell me, but I've heard through a little birdie, is that Dr. Hill has got a mad sweet tooth, so guard carefully the yummy chocolates at the center of your tables. Okay, our second speaker for today is Dr. Marguerite Roza. She is a research associate professor at the University of Washington's College of Education and senior scholar at the Center on Reinventing Public Education. Dr. Roza's research focuses on quantitative policy analysis, particularly in the area of education finance. Dr. Roza is author of the highly regarded education finance book, Educational Economics: Where Do School Funds Go? She is also the former Senior Economic and Data Advisor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I'm told Dr. Roza's family lived in Sun Valley for a while, and you are the mother of 4 teenage girls. Good luck to you. All right, so I believe we are going to hear from Dr. Hill first. Dr. Hill.
I really don't know about the sweet tooth, but I do have an Idaho connection. I worked for Frank Church until he fired me and caused my dissertation to be written in an emergency. I've been asked to bring information from other places into Idaho, and I'm going to give you lots of ideas that other people are pursuing and not particularly make a pitch for anyone, but try to explain why people are striving so much to find new ways of running state and local public education. I think you'll recognize this slide. Almost every state faces a similar set of challenges. Certainly, not enough kids are graduating from school, and in some neighborhoods, fewer than half. Even among the graduates, most states, most students go to college unprepared and have to take remedial classes. Everybody knows that that's shortchanging our kids and putting us in an economic negative position relative to the rest of the world. So most states are concluding that they're not going to get dramatically different outcomes by doing exactly the same thing. So they're searching for better ways of doing what they do. And there's a lot of different thinking right now. It's kind of an exciting period of ferment. But there are a number of things a lot of states are starting to converge on. First of all, that from the state perspective, a lot of states have tied up all their money into categorical programs, a program for this project or this group of students or whatever that can only be used that way. And some of those programs are, for example, transportation. So the money's all tied up. The teachers, almost everybody's got a lot of good teachers, but almost every state realizes that there's a very large pool of college-educated people who might be interested in teaching, who are being held out by the rules, and they want to experiment with opening up teaching. And a lot of states are concerned that their regulation is excessive. And in fact, if you look in the past at the way state legal structures and so on came about, they were all ad hoc. One new regulation to solve one new problem. And you end up getting basically a wheelbarrow load of regulations in California, not so much other places. And then everybody is concerned that we have a technology revolution, and there has to be something in it for student education, whether that means individualization, whether it means getting kids in areas where there's not a qualified physics teacher or science teacher access to a good one somewhere else. No one knows exactly what application, but everybody's sure that we have to start experimenting with those things. And then there's a problem that Marguerite will talk about a little bit, but almost every state has commitments to its existing public school system, which at this point is not actually performing as we need it to, that are in excess of the funding. So that almost every state is going to end up trying to operate on fewer real dollars in the future than they did in the past. So this is kind of a bundle of problems, and I actually will try to be a little more sunny going next. But states are trying a lot of things, and I know it's true here. I know it's true elsewhere. If you just listen to the noise, there's a lot of conflict, a lot of disagreement. But underneath all that is something else. It's problem solving, and problem solving in an environment where people are earnestly trying, but we're not getting what we want yet, is bound to be conflictual. And I don't think any state has really solved the problem of how to have an earnest conversation about where it needs to go without making some group feel that they were not respected, or without dealing harshly with the serious efforts of people in the schools. But the truth is, we have to do better. We have to find a way. It has to be open conversation about it. There are ideas out there, and some of them add up a little bit. One of them is pupil-based funding, which is having the states fund students and have the money go with students to the schools instead of having the states fund buses or buildings or professional development or other particular programs, and trying to put the money into the schools so the teachers and principals in the schools can actually use it for the needs of the students they have and experiment with new things. All of this is in an effort to try to answer the question, is this the best we can do for our kids by trying things to see what's better? The second is the use of chartering. And I'm not going to make you an argument, a market argument for chartering, but rather chartering is a way to open up the way schools operate, the way money is used, the way time is used, the way teachers work, to let open the way for new experimentation, especially on use of technology, on hybrid schools where kids learn certain things online that gets reinforced by the teacher. States are moving this direction. The third thing states are doing is building statewide and local-wide databases on every student, every class a student takes, on every student's absolute level of performance and their gain, so that every year, and in some cases even every few months, you can see what students are learning, ask what's making a good outcome happen, and if a kid isn't learning, say, what can we do for this child now before it's too late? So data is a very important part of what states are doing. Another point that I could elaborate because it's my shtick, but I will try not to, the idea of portfolio school districts that say, we want to get the best education for the students we're responsible for any way we can do it. If we can do that the conventional way, supporting the schools the way they've done it before, which is certainly the case in a lot of places, that's what we should do. But if we have students that are consistently not doing well in our schools, we have to find something else for them. That's where the experimentation with new approaches to instruction, new uses of time, new uses of teachers, new uses of technology come about. Portfolio districts are basically school districts that take responsibility for that experimentation. And then some states are trying to think of how to make their state education agency something other than a non-entity. I don't know Idaho. I have the freedom to talk about it any way I like. Most states, the state education agencies become a conduit for regulation, for federal programs. It doesn't really play a role in helping teachers very much or in trying to improve the schools. It's not driving this ferment that I've just described. And states are now trying to say, let's remake the state education agency so it is the chief experimenter. It's the organization that helps districts that want to try new things do it, helps them assess what they've got, helps them find new options if they don't know what to do next. Now, one thing that I see around the country is that there's a big tension in the reforms that I see taking place between centralization and decentralization. At one level, centralization says somebody, the state, the legislature, the school board, knows the right way to do everything and will put it into policy, and if people just comply with it, everything will work well. And that's one approach. It hasn't been working very well, but that's one approach. Another approach is the more empirical one that says, how do we get someplace with our schools we've never been before in terms of overall student achievement, in terms of lowering the achievement gap? How do we put ourselves in a position to use the good old American way of experimentation, of choosing what works, of spreading it bigger, of always looking for something better? How do we get ourselves in that position? And these two things in state policy are actually all tangled up and somewhat in conflict. We see states, for example, that are trying simultaneously to encourage schools and districts to experiment with new ideas, and they're telling them, we'll tell you whom you can hire and how much you can pay them. And those things don't fit together very well. Ohio has been the previous governor was trying to say every school will be staffed in an exactly the same way, and if you've got more than 200 kids, you get a whole nurse. Well, it turns out that schools don't all need the same things, and if they instead had the money and could make decisions about it, you get better outcomes. So basically, the centralization and what I called decentralization of performance management, which I described that before, simply an empirical effort to say, let's keep looking for something better. Where do we get new ideas? How do we try them out? That gets helped by having good statewide and local measurements of school value added, letting families choose. And I'm not making a market argument. It's more that if you've got a district that's experimenting, that's trying new things, then schools are going to be different. And why would you tell people you have to go to this school even though there's another one in the same town that fits you better? So it's more just letting people allocate themselves. And then seeing the supply of schools, the set of schools we have in a community or a state, as something that is flexible in light of experience. What's working, what's not working. So I've already made this point, and I won't say much more about it. One thing that I have learned in my many years of working with business leaders is that we think of the Republican Party as being a kind of a pro-business, pro-markets party. But I also, a lot of my CEO friends will tell me business people don't believe in markets, they believe in management. And you can see this happening in states where the business ethics comes in and pretty soon you get centralization. And that doesn't work very well. So basically, the two parties, and I think people that were here yesterday hearing about the two parties, at some level are coming together on the idea that education needs not to be doctrinaire. It is a public service. It needs to have some elements of the market. We need to experiment. The whole purpose is to get it right, not to fit any one ideology. And some states that are tangling up centralization and decentralization are tangling up their own efforts. This is a busy chart. I want to go a little further on centralization. Just follow the first column under favorable conditions. To centralize, you have to assume you know what to do in every case. From a state perspective or a district perspective, you have to assume that if people just followed the rules, they would succeed. And there's no evidence of that anywhere in this country. Basically, performance management, which is an empirical approach to seeing how you can create new options and what they'll get you, is the only approach that makes sense in the current circumstances. Just in this chart, on the second big bullet, I've talked about performance management, and I'm hoping people ask me more questions. There is a paper to hand out that will talk more about that. But it isn't like a state has to move toward a dramatic reform all at once. It all starts with saying, let's get the evidence. Where are kids learning? Where aren't they learning? What are they learning from? What aren't they learning from? Where do we need to find options because kids aren't learning? What kind of options can we try? What options of those are working? Which ones are not? And so it starts with data about what students are learning, starts with money that can be used flexibly at the local school level so that people can make decent adaptations to their kids' needs. It starts with letting people choose their schools within the district. And frankly, my argument here is more an escape argument. Why keep somebody in a school that doesn't fit them? A definite encouragement of districts that, especially small rural districts that may have problems in some areas of teaching, starting to experiment with combinations of direct teaching and online teaching. Using chartering, not as a mechanism just for letting anybody come and start a school, but as a mechanism for experimentation. The district says, let's try some new things and see if they work. And then finally, ultimately, states are moving toward the direction of requiring districts to close the schools that don't work and find new options for the kids. And these steps can be taken sequentially. They don't have to be taken all at once. The first thing you want to do is know where the data are. But the other points, again, in the paper I've given you, it gives a sequence of actions that may be useful. Well, there's a lot to learn from other states, and in Q&A, glad to say more. Obviously, it depends on where Idaho wants to go. It depends on things you know and I don't about what Idaho has already tried, what's tolerable here, what the conditions are, where kids are prospering and where they're not. But I've set up the broad frame, and now Marguerite Roza is going to talk about one of the elements that I mentioned before, which is getting the money in a place where people can decide what to do with it instead of having it all tied up in precedent and regulation. How do you think about that? How do you understand the flow of money? What do we know about where it goes here? How can we learn more?
So yes, I'm going to talk about the money, but that is not an excuse for you to just focus on the dessert, because there's a lot in the money that tells the real story of public education. In fact, the money is the real story in some ways of why we need to do reform. It's money and outcomes together, and so I'll give you a little bit of an overview of how I've been approaching this. So let's see, I guess we have this. This is a scatter plot of Idaho's school districts. Arrayed on the bottom axis is adjusted per pupil spending. That means we've adjusted it, and by we I mean the Center for American Progress, not actually me. They've adjusted it based on the kinds of kids at each district. And on the vertical axis is the state achievement index. And you can see that it's mostly a scatter plot, right? It's not like in Idaho, we have this clear relationship between spending and outcomes. Otherwise, all the dots would be nicely lined up in an upward sloping line. There is actually some relationship, but barely. Right now we have districts all over the map in terms of, and I don't mean just the geographic map, I mean we have high spending districts, low spending districts, high achieving districts, low achieving districts, some of each type in each different category. But you all know this, I'm sure, and know exactly which district is the one in your neighborhood, right? You're staring at it right now. You know which one it is? Probably not, because even though these data are readily available, generally speaking, we talk about finance or we talk about outcomes, and never the twain shall meet. But really in these stories, and I'm going to come off the podium here for a second if that's okay, you're going to find out a lot more of what's going on. If you see these sort of that yellow dot at the very top, right? It's a high spending but high performing district. If you go directly down to it at the bottom there, in the lower right-hand quadrant, you see a red dot, which is a high spending, low performing district. Okay, so right now at that spending level, we have an example of one that has great achievement and one that doesn't. If you switch over to the other side, you'll see some examples in the green dots of high achieving but low spending districts. Those ones seem to hold the key to the answers that everybody could be able to adopt. And below that, you see the yellow dots that are low spending, low achieving. And certainly, they might have an axe to grind if we came into their neighborhood and said, it's time for you to increase your performance, because they would say, show me as much money as the ones in the upper right-hand quadrant, and I will show you the results. So it's a very complicated picture, and one that needs to be woven together if we're going to get to the outcomes. Okay, so the reason I say it's a financial story is if you look 10 years down the road, you will realize that the rate at which revenues will grow in public education is not as fast as the rate at which expenditures will grow. The top line is expenditures. It grows, or it tries to grow, because labor costs grow, benefits grow, salaries grow, and so on. That's the cost of doing exactly what we've been doing year after year after year, not adding anything new. The bottom line is the likely revenues in this country. Revenues are just not going to grow as fast as what we will see the costs are. So what we are doing is setting ourselves up for a decade of budget gaps. That means we're going to cut, and then we're going to cut some more the next year, and then we're going to cut some more the next year, and then we're going to cut some more the next year. And that's the problem we're in, and that's why we need an overhaul in addition to thinking about the student outcomes. So 3 scenarios. We could do slow cuts that work to erode public education in Idaho. And that's cutting important programs, shortening the school year, all the kinds of things that we know happen in districts when resources are tight. Scenario number 2, we could tinker around the edges and try to unplug the coffee pots and ever so slightly increase class sizes and get rid of some ineffective programs and tinker, basically tinker and stuff to leave the classroom intact. That means we do pretty much what we've been doing at a slightly lower cost. And then there's scenario 3, the more far-reaching, ambitious scenario where we redesign schooling to improve the processes and outcomes and the financial sustainability of the system we have. But that doesn't happen by itself. So, 2 more quick data slides, and then we'll get into the meat of some of the opportunity here. This is a picture from the Bureau of Labor Statistics of what happens to labor during the recessions. The gray bands, and I'm going to make sure they showed up here. I think so. You can see these gray bands. Are recessions. And so you see 3 large recessions in recent memory. And the red dots are the private sector labor. And not surprisingly, every time you hit a recession, private sector sees a dip in labor, right? We know that happens. So the top line, the blue dots, are public education labor. And what you'll notice is that straight through the last three recessions, we didn't see a dip. Public education labor in this country continued to grow and grow and grow, and it did for a lot of reasons we won't talk about here, except that in this last recession, it was so deep and so long that even in public education, labor started to dip. And when that happens, because it doesn't happen as regularly in the private sector, it's incredibly disruptive for public education. So we're at a moment when the conditions are right for rethinking how the system operates, because it doesn't know how to shrink in any normal way. So if you look just at how many people we have in public education, this shows nationally the number of education staff per 1,000 students. So we're controlling for the number of kids here. And you'll see back in 1970, the system employed 58 adults for every 1,000 kids. And that grew to 100 and then 110. And it peaked in about 2008 at 127 adults per 1,000 students. So this is a system that's been adding adults as a reform strategy, right? Adding adults faster than we've been adding kids to the public education system. We have done reform by adding adults. That's what we've done. That strategy does not appear financially sustainable anymore. We will not get education reform by adding more adults to the system. In fact, we're likely, as you can see, we've had our first dip in forever. We are likely going to have to figure out how to go the opposite direction. How can we redesign to do education without 127 adults per 1,000 kids? What opportunities are there? And how can we still do that and make the learning better for kids? So that's a different frame for thinking about it, and it's one that demands a different sort of leadership approach in districts. One little note about the benefits, also growing. The red here, the total column or rows, I guess each, are the expenditures, and the red portion of that is the benefits nationally. And as you can see, the benefits are growing faster than the total is growing, such that at the very top, as you can see the line comes back in, that's what's happening, is we are actually creating a system that is shrinking our non-benefit spending even as revenues grow. In Idaho, in 2004, benefit rate was 30.8%. 4 years later, it was 32.2%. That's not normal growth, right? That's growth because if it stayed 30.8%, it would have grown, right? Labor costs grew, so benefits would grow. You shouldn't be actually changing your percentage benefit rate there, and it's probably grown since then. So we have a problem with that, and one that's, again, creates an unsustainability. So now that you're all incredibly depressed, have a bite of a brownie, we'll start talking about the solutions. I always feel like I should pump people up after that big depressing introduction. But there is an opportunity here, and I lay out an opportunity sort of in 4 categories of creating a system that's actually seeking innovation towards solving both of these outcomes and financial challenges. And the first component is to fund the students and the student types. We've been funding inputs into the system, labor I mentioned, or class sizes, or textbooks, and so on. And when you do that, the money is sort of locked into those categories. If you instead fund the students, then the money remains liquid or interchangeable and can be used for multiple different kinds of things. And when you do that, you can allocate larger amounts of money for poor or bilingual kids, but you're funding the kids, not the programs that they receive. And that allows the programs to evolve over time. Under that category, I mentioned avoid overfunding smaller districts or hold harmless provisions, and I'll show you why in a minute, because that creates another incentive for systems to stay the way they are versus adapt to their conditions. And then you want to remove process constraints on input specification. When you don't, and you fund the inputs, we get all sorts of distorted patterns. And if you're interested in those distorted patterns, I have a book that's filled with them. But I just brought a couple of fun ones today. One is the salaries of math and science teachers. It turns out in public education, we pay math and science teachers less than we pay all other teachers. And you're thinking, well, not here. We have a salary schedule. It pays uniformly based on longevity and master's degrees. Yeah, that's a way to pay math and science teachers less than all other teachers. And you know how that works, right? It works because by not including labor market value in our pay scheme, what do the math and science teachers do? They leave. They go off and get other jobs. They have much more regular turnover in your math and science teachers. The chemistry teacher stays, the French teacher stays. They stay till the bitter end, and they're the ones who are pulling down much higher salaries. And we have a gazillion of these kinds of patterns, but this shows all the districts in my state, in Washington State, and how much less we're paying the math and science teachers on average. And it's consistent nationally. We found it. We can look up the patterns for any of the categories I mentioned. But if you really were trying to build strong math and science programs, we wouldn't systematically pay the teachers of those subjects less, which we're doing. And those are the kinds of things, the distortions that appear in our system when we fund the ingredients or the inputs into schooling instead of funding the students. So another example here is some research we have coming out soon on small district subsidies. And many states subsidize small districts because they're small, they give them extra money. But not all of them do. And you can see Idaho does. It's kind of right there in the middle of the top half or so, showing that the small districts are funded roughly a little over 5% more on average than the statewide average. And what's interesting about this is that in the states that overfund small districts for being small, their small districts perform more poorly than in the states that don't. And that's very counterintuitive. Why would giving them extra money have the opposite effect? And we think, and we're doing some exploration on this, is that the small districts try to look like large districts, right? They try to have the counselor and the principal and the PE teacher and the calculus teacher, and they can't quite do that very well. They don't improvise and explore how to use their resources in ways that make sense for their community. In some of the small districts where they're not overfunded, the small districts are engines of innovation. They're the first users of technology. They're also the ones that have gone and figured out how to use part-time staff to do things, and so on. I can give you lots of examples of that. So the point here is to not assume that every district has to be staffed in a certain way and then fund them for that. It's to fund the students wherever they go and let those systems try to figure that out. Okay, so point number 2, emphasize productivity and create transparency. And here the idea is to really focus on the kind of data that links spending and outcomes, the kind of data that's probably largely been absent from discussions, this kind of data, right? So every superintendent should know where my district is. In fact, their board should know where the district is, and their community should, and they should all be creating an appetite for moving vertically on these graphs, right? How can, with the money I have, that I can learn from the districts that are above me and how they spend money and explore those models and drift upward. So those are the kinds of things that should absolutely be emphasized in those pictures. And doing so, we can use those maps to provide transparency and lastly to facilitate budgeting. It's a little thing I'll talk about later if you have questions on it, but the more people involved in financial decisions, then the more thoughtful they become. Okay, so the next strategy is to incent innovation. So by incenting innovations, building off of what Paul mentioned, it's about creating the conditions for the innovation to happen where people are ready for it, instead of saying, here's the innovation we want you all to do. And they're doing this in a few states. They're calling it a coalition of the willing or many different phrases. But the idea is to create things like innovation grants, where you can take a pot of money, say that $30 million that I heard about just before lunch that's floating around somewhere in Idaho, and do things like create innovation grants where there are competitive grants. And districts, I'm so subtle, aren't I? So districts and schools can apply for them on wherever their appetite is for innovation. And when they do so, they propose an innovation, but preferably an innovation that doesn't drive up operating costs in the long run. So that should be part of the application. Because if they do then do an innovation, and maybe it's around special ed, or it's around science learning, or Spanish language instruction, then if it doesn't drive up costs in the long run, then if you go back to that productivity map, it's something that anybody else in the state could then adopt. It's available because it's not expensive. And the money is just a way to give people the time and space to think about it. And there are many of those opportunities. Sometimes what also helps is to create some training for district leaders where they can get some exposure, innovation fairs and those kinds of things, or financial training so they could start thinking about this. But there might be more people in your system with more of an appetite for change than you know. So I'll give you some examples of where innovation can happen. One is around this benefits problem. If you look at this picture, you'll see that teachers make a little bit less than computer programmers and accountants on average, you know this, but have higher benefits, but still doesn't quite get to the same level. But if you looked at those same numbers on a per-week basis, you would see that teachers on a per-week basis make over $1,500, which is a little bit higher, actually, than the computer programmers and the accountants. But the benefits on a week of labor for our teachers is really where the problem is. It's so high, and that's because we have created a job and a school structure that has people working 34 weeks. But we give out full-time benefits, which makes sense because they're not going to get benefits from another job that just operates in the summer. But what if we could rethink schooling, where we could use a smaller labor force that worked a longer year? Then we could actually pay the people the incremental difference. There's a lot into this for teachers where they could earn quite a bit more money if they did that, and figure out a schooling model where it's possible maybe geometry is an option over the summer, and your best geometry teacher could teach another batch of kids, and some of the kids who want a lighter workload in the school year could knock out geometry over the summer, and so on. So there's a lot of possibilities there with special ed and everything else that don't necessarily change the school year for everybody. So those are the kind of innovations that different communities could play around with. Another one is this rocket ship model. You may have heard, there's a school in California, or a couple schools, where they figured out how to use 3 teachers to teach 4 classrooms. And they do that by rotating the kids through a computer lab. But you could see how it works here. There are 2 humanities teachers that work half the day, 1 math and science teacher that stops by each classroom. And this is in the elementary years. And then the kids go through the tech lab. I ran the numbers. For Idaho, if every elementary school implemented a model like this, which I'm not suggesting, but I'm just trying to show you the magnitude of the effect, then that would free up $28 million in the state of Idaho, or about $264 per kid, which could be used for something else. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think some of those opportunities are very pro-teacher. When you ask teachers, and this is a survey that Dan Goldhaber and Mike Darman did, would you rather have a $5,000 bonus or 2 fewer kids in each class that you teach? What do you think they picked? They usually say, I prefer smaller classes, until they see how many dollars are at stake. And then they say, at 83% of them, I'll take the cash, thank you very much. So $5,000 trumps 2 fewer kids if you actually put real numbers in front of people. Similarly, people will take the cash over having an aide in their classroom, and the cash, even though at a lower rate, over more prep time. And these are counter to what we hear often in the system, but when you put real numbers in for people, they might be making different decisions. So my last point here is then to augment accountability. And that means you're allowing the student choice kinds of things that Paul mentioned, and the funding portability that comes with that, because that gives students a way to migrate into the more innovative models if they really are meeting their needs. And I'll also say you might have a process for school closure, because if you are in Idaho and you're funding year after year after year this district over here, this lower red one there, one thing that district knows right now is they're going to get that money again next year anyway, right? They get a lot of money, and it's a fairly poor bet for state funds, right? It's spending a lot of money, and they get very low returns on that. But we'll do it again next year, and we'll do it again next year. And until the system can figure out how to grab hold of the kids and the money in that school and move them to another setting, I think that you really don't create a system that emphasizes accountability and innovation. So it does not that you have to do a lot of these sort of close a school kind of models, but where you can close a school or a program, every once in a while it does send the message to the system that you're serious. So I'll end with that slide, and I'm going to leave this slide up because I hope you like it, and you'll go in and look at the Center for American Progress website. You could click on every dot and figure out which one is your district. You can rank the small districts and so on. But I'll end there because I know you have a lot of questions. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you both. Thank you.
How am I qualified to sit here tonight and talk about a pretty serious subject? And the short answer is because I'm an addict. I am addicted to chewing and swallowing. I'm addicted